The night my daughter-in-law called me a dockhand. 200 people laughed. Not because the joke was funny. Because every person in that room believed she had the power to decide who I was. By sunrise, she would ask me to sign away the company I had built over 45 years. And by noon, my 12-year-old granddaughter would hand me a recording that proved the company was never the real target. My name is Thomas Mercer. I was 72 years old when my family tried to remove me from Northstar Ferry Lines. I founded Northstar with one rusted passenger boat, a borrowed engine, and a mortgage my wife Ellen and I could barely afford. By the time I retired from daily operations, we owned 6 ferries, 3 harbor terminals, a maintenance yard, and the trust of nearly every island community along the southern Maine coast. People depended on our boats for more than tourism. We carried teachers to island schools. We transported medicine when winter storms grounded aircraft. We brought construction crews, firefighters, mail, groceries, and sometimes frightened families leaving homes they would never return to. Northstar was not a luxury brand. It was a promise. If the water was passable, we would come. The company's 50th anniversary celebration was held aboard the L&M, our newest flagship, named after my late wife. The upper deck had been transformed into a floating ballroom. White lights wrapped the rails. A jazz quartet played near the observation windows. Waiters carried champagne past framed photographs showing Northstar's history. In the first photograph, I was 27, standing beside our original boat in a raincoat 3 sizes too large. In the last photograph, my son Ryan stood at the launch ceremony for the L&M, smiling beneath a banner that called him Northstar's visionary president. I did not resent the photograph. I had chosen Ryan to lead the company. I only wished leadership had changed him less. Ellen had been gone 18 months. Cancer took her slowly enough for us to say goodbye, but not slowly enough for me to learn how to live without her. After she died, I stopped attending most company events. Vivian said my presence made investors nervous. She claimed I talked too much about maintenance costs, weather risks, and employee pensions. In her words, I made Northstar sound like a transportation company instead of a growth opportunity. That night, however, the flagship carried my wife's name. No one was keeping me away. I arrived 3 hours before the guests. Old habits. A man who has spent his life around boats does not trust a celebration until he has walked the decks himself. The captain, Luis Ortega, met me at the gangway. Luis had worked for Northstar for 26 years. He looked uncomfortable. "Thomas," he said, "Vivian asked that you stay out of the engine spaces tonight." Did the engines ask the same thing? He almost smiled. Then his expression tightened. "We have a pressure fluctuation in the starboard cooling system." "How bad?" "Not dangerous yet. But if we lose the secondary pump, we cancel the harbor loop." The anniversary voyage was supposed to carry investors, state officials, employees, and reporters through Casco Bay. Canceling would embarrass Ryan. Worse, it would give Vivian another reason to claim the fleet was outdated and needed outside capital. I removed my jacket. "Show me." The problem was not the pump. It was a misaligned bypass valve installed during the previous week's service. The new maintenance contractor had forced the assembly into place, damaging the seal. A repair report hanging beside the control panel said the work had been inspected and approved. At the bottom was a signature. Thomas Mercer. Mine. I had not signed it. I photographed the report before touching anything. Then Luis and I replaced the seal, realigned the valve, and tested the system twice. By the time the first guests boarded, the pressure held steady. My dress shirt was damp. There was grease on my sleeve. I planned to change in the captain's cabin. I never got the chance. Vivian found me beside the service stairwell. She wore a silver gown, diamond earrings, and the expression she used whenever something threatened the picture she had arranged. "What are you wearing?" "A shirt." "You look like you crawled through an engine." "That is because I crawled through an engine." Her smile disappeared. "This is exactly why Ryan asked you not to interfere. The cooling system was failing. We have contractors for that." The contractor signed my name to a false inspection. For half a second, fear crossed her face. Then it was gone. You're confused. I know my own signature. Thomas, tonight is important. The Halcyon Group is considering a major investment. We cannot have you wandering around accusing vendors. I am not wondering. She glanced toward the ballroom doors. Guests were beginning to gather. Go change, she whispered. Then sit near the back. Please do not tell stories unless someone asks. I should have confronted her then. I should have shown Ryan the forged report in front of Louise. Instead, I decided to wait until after the voyage. Ellen used to say anger gives guilty people a map. Stay calm, and they reveal where the doors are. The L&M pulled away from the pier at 7:15. Portland's lights stretched across the water. Guests applauded as we passed the breakwater. Ryan took the stage beneath the screen displaying North Star's blue compass logo. He spoke well. He always had. He thanked the investors, the State Transportation Office, and the executive team. He thanked Vivian for dragging a traditional family operation into the modern economy. Then he spoke about the company's founder. For one foolish moment, I expected him to call my name. Instead, Ryan said, North Star began with a hard-working generation that understood boats, but tonight belongs to the generation that understands scale. The applause was polite. Vivian stepped up beside him. Her eyes found me near the side wall. And speaking of the old days, she said, some of you may have noticed our retired dockhand still likes to inspect everything personally. A few guests turned toward me. Vivian raised her glass. Thomas, we promise the professional crew has it from here. People laughed. Not everyone. Louise did not. Several longtime employees stared at the floor. Ryan smiled, but his face looked tight. I stood beside a framed photograph of myself launching the first North Star boat. A waiter passing behind me collided with another guest. A tray tipped. Champagne spilled across the floor near Vivian's shoes. She looked at the puddle, then at me. Thomas, she said into the microphone, since you are already dressed for maintenance, would you mind? The room became silent before the first laugh started. Then several people joined in. I looked at Ryan. He could have stopped it with one sentence. He could have said, that man founded this company. He could have stepped down from the stage and cleaned the spill himself. Instead, he adjusted his cuff and looked toward the windows. The humiliation was not Vivian's joke. It was my son's silence. I took a napkin from the nearest table. Then I bent down and wiped the champagne from the polished deck. Vivian continued her speech above me. She spoke about expansion, efficiency, and a new generation of leadership. I listened to every word. She announced that North Star would soon pursue strategic restructuring of underused waterfront assets. That phrase mattered. The 3 harbor terminals were not underused. They were the foundation of the company. And Vivian did not own them. I did. More precisely, the Mercer Harbor Trust owned them, and I controlled the trust. When I stood again, my knees hurt. Vivian leaned away from the microphone. See? She said softly. Everything works better when people accept their place. I smiled. It was not warmth. It was recognition. She had just told me exactly what she believed. Later, while the guests watched fireworks from the upper deck, I found Ryan alone near the bridge. You let her humiliate me. He kept his eyes on the water. She was trying to keep the mood light. She called me a dockhand. You did work the docks. I built them. Ryan exhaled. Dad, this is why tonight matters. Investors do not want founders hovering over every decision. Did you authorize Halcyon to review the terminals? He turned. Who told you that? Vivian announced restructuring. It is preliminary. The terminals are not company assets. They should be. They are protected. They are trapped, he snapped. $40 million in waterfront property sitting in a trust while North Star struggles to modernize. That was the first time he admitted the company was struggling. How badly? He looked away again. We will discuss it tomorrow. Discuss what? A transition agreement. Vivian's attorneys prepared it. I laughed once. The sound surprised him. You let your wife's attorneys prepare my transition? It protects everyone. That usually means it protects the person holding the pen. Ryan's jaw tightened. 9 o'clock tomorrow. My office. Please do not make this harder than it has to be. He walked away before I answered. At 10:30, the L&M returned to the terminal. Vivian stood at the gangway saying goodbye to investors. When I passed her, she touched my arm. Wear something presentable tomorrow, she said. There will be a notary. I looked at her hand until she removed it. Then I walked to the parking lot. Sophie was waiting beside my truck. My granddaughter was 12, small for her age, with Ellen's dark eyes and Ryan's nervous habit of biting the inside of her cheek. She should have been home. What are you doing out here? Grandma June brought me. I told her I left my backpack on the boat. Did you? No. She glanced toward the terminal. Then she took an old phone from her coat pocket. The screen was cracked. I recorded Mom and Dad. My chest tightened. Why? Because they stopped talking whenever I entered the room. Sophie, you should not be involved in business problems. It is not just business. She pressed the phone into my hand. A recording was already open. Before I could play it, Vivian's voice came from the terminal entrance. Sophie? My granddaughter flinched. She closed my fingers around the phone. Do not let them know you have it, she whispered. What is on here? Her eyes filled with tears. Mom said the oldest ferry has to fail during your final voyage. I stared at her. What final voyage? The one after you sign tomorrow. She stepped backward as Vivian approached. Then she said the sentence that changed the entire fight. Grandpa, she said, if the boat fails with you in charge, nobody will question what happens to the pension money afterward. The recording began with my son saying, "What if my father is still aboard when it happens?" Vivian answered, "Then the story is even cleaner." I did not hear the rest that night. Vivian was already crossing the parking lot toward us, and Sophie's face had gone pale. I slipped the cracked phone into the inside pocket of my coat and forced my expression to soften. Found your backpack? Vivian asked. Sophie shook her head. Vivian looked at me. What did she give you? A grocery list, I said. My granddaughter understood immediately. She reached into her other pocket and produced a folded sheet of paper covered in school handwriting. Grandpa promised to help me build a model lighthouse, she said. Vivian held out her hand. Sophie gave her the paper. It listed glue, poster board, batteries, paint, and a tiny motor. The lie was not perfect. It was simply ordinary enough to survive inspection. Vivian read it, then looked at me again. You are meeting us at 9. I remember. And do not contact any board members before then. That instruction confirmed she was afraid of what the board might hear. I am retired, I said. Who would listen to a retired dockhand? Her lips tightened. She took Sophie by the shoulder and guided her toward the waiting car. My granddaughter glanced back once. I placed my hand over the phone inside my coat. She nodded. By the time I reached my truck, Vivian's taillights had disappeared. I locked the doors before playing the recording. Ryan's voice came first. If anyone gets hurt, we were never part of the maintenance decision. Vivian sounded irritated. No one is getting hurt. The Harbor Queen loses propulsion inside the channel. The captain calls for assistance. Thomas is listed as supervising the farewell voyage, so the press blames outdated leadership. And if Dad is still aboard? Then the story is even cleaner. He takes responsibility in front of the cameras, steps away permanently, and halcyon announces an emergency rescue package. There was a pause. Then Ryan asked, What about the pension reserve? Vivian laughed softly. That is the rescue package. I stopped the recording. For 45 years, North Star employees had surrendered part of every paycheck to a pension fund Ellen and I treated as sacred. Deckhands who worked Christmas mornings. Mechanics who crawled through hot engine rooms. Ticket clerks who remembered every island child by name. Vivian was planning to use their retirement money to hide a manufactured company crisis. And my son knew enough to ask about it. I forced myself to continue. Ryan said, the trustees will never approve it. They will after the accident. We classify the transfer as temporary stabilization financing. That sounds illegal. It sounds necessary. What if my father reads the agreement? He will not understand it. The words were spoken without hesitation. Not he might miss something. Not he is grieving. He will not understand it. My son had reduced 45 years of judgment to an assumption that age had made me harmless. Then Vivian said, once the terminals move into North Star Holdings, Halcyon buys the debt. Their property company acquires the waterfront. We walk away with our shares before the pension losses are discovered. Ryan's breathing became audible. And my father? Golden Pines has already accepted the deposit. Golden Pines was an assisted living facility nearly 2 hours inland. They had reserved a room for me before asking whether I would leave my home. Ryan whispered, Sophie will hate us. Vivian answered, children hate whatever interrupts their comfort. She will adjust. The recording ended. For several minutes, I sat in the dark truck while harbor fog pressed against the windshield. I had expected greed. I had not expected architecture. This was not one dishonest transfer. It was a designed collapse. A staged mechanical failure. A public scapegoat. A pension raid. A waterfront sale. And finally, my removal. Every piece protected the next. That was when I stopped thinking like a father whose feelings had been hurt. I began thinking like the man who had kept boats alive in winter seas. When water enters a hull, you do not argue with it. You find the breach. You seal the compartment. And if the damage is deliberate, you remove the person holding the drill. At 6 the next morning, I called Eleanor Price. Eleanor had served as North Star's outside counsel for 23 years before Vivian replaced her with a corporate firm from New York. She answered on the second ring. Thomas, people your age are supposed to call after sunrise. People my age built sunrise. She heard something in my voice. What happened? I need you to review a transition agreement before 9. How many pages? 78. That is not a transition agreement. That is a burial. I drove to her office carrying the cracked phone, the photographed inspection report, and every trust document I still kept at home. Eleanor arrived wearing hiking boots beneath a navy suit. She listened to Sophie's recording once. Then she played it again. When it ended, she removed her glasses. Do not sign anything. I need them to believe I will. That is different. She called a forensic accountant named Caleb Monroe and a retired Coast Guard investigator named Naomi Bell. Both owed North Star favors. By 7:30, the four of us were gathered around Eleanor's conference table. Caleb began tracing public filings connected to Halcyon Group. Naomi examined the maintenance photograph. Eleanor opened the Mercer Harbor Trust. I watched her expression change as she reached an amendment Ellen had insisted on adding 14 years earlier. What? I asked. She turned the page toward me. If a controlling officer of North Star attempts to obtain trust property through fraud, coercion, or misuse of employee benefit assets, that officer becomes permanently ineligible to control the terminals. Ryan is a controlling officer. So is Vivian. Who takes control? Eleanor tapped the next paragraph. The terminals transfer into an independent employee benefit trust managed by 5 elected North Star workers. For years, I had considered the clause overly dramatic. Ellen had not. She believed good planning accounted for people becoming their worst selves. Activating it would save the terminals from Halcyon. It would also end the Mercer family's control of the waterfront, including mine. Eleanor watched me absorb that. "Your wife built a fire door," she said. "You can close it, but once it shuts, the family does not reopen it." I thought of Ryan as a boy, standing on an overturned bucket while I taught him to tie a bowl in. I had imagined the terminals passing to him. Then to Sophie. Legacy encourages dangerous fantasies. We start believing the next generation deserves what the previous one protected, whether they protect it or not. "Prepare the activation documents," I said. Eleanor did not move. "Are you certain?" "No. Prepare them anyway." At 8:45, I entered Ryan's office carrying nothing but my reading glasses. Vivian sat at the conference table beside two attorneys and a notary. Ryan stood near the windows. The harbor stretched behind him, gray and cold. A blue folder waited at my seat. Vivian smiled. "You look rested." "I slept very well." That was a lie. She pushed the folder toward me. The title read North Star Continuity and Modernization Agreement. For the first 12 pages, the language sounded harmless. Advisory authority. Operational succession. Temporary voting alignment. Then the real document emerged. Page 26 transferred my controlling shares. Page 39 gave Ryan authority over the Harbor Trust. Page 51 granted Vivian emergency access to employee benefit reserves. Page 64 authorized a medical representative to determine whether I remained capable of participating in company decisions. Attached to the final page was a letter from a doctor I had never met. It described me as forgetful, emotionally unstable, and resistant to necessary care. I looked up. "Who is Dr. Stephen Hale?" Vivian folded her hands. "A geriatric consultant." "Has he examined me?" "He reviewed family observations." Ryan stared at the floor. The document was not merely designed to take my property. It was designed to make any objection sound like proof that I should be ignored. I closed the folder. "I have one condition." Vivian's smile widened. "Of course." "I will sign during the final voyage of the Harbor Queen tomorrow evening." Ryan looked up sharply. "Why that boat?" "It was Ellen's favorite." Vivian and Ryan exchanged a glance. The same boat Sophie's recording said had been chosen to fail. I continued. "I want the board present. Investors. Senior employees. The pension trustees. State transportation officials." One attorney leaned toward Vivian. "That creates unnecessary exposure." "Then I do not sign." Silence. Vivian studied me. She believed she was studying an old man's sentimentality. In truth, she was calculating whether her staged failure could survive a larger audience. Finally, she smiled. "We can make that work." "I also want the agreement projected on the main screen before I sign." "That is not customary," the attorney said. "Neither is surrendering 50 years of work." Ryan poured himself water, but his hand shook enough for the glass to touch the pitcher. Vivian placed the papers back into the folder. "Tomorrow at 6. We will call it the Founder's Farewell Voyage." "Call it whatever helps you sleep." Her eyes narrowed, but she let the remark pass. I stood. Ryan followed me into the hallway. "Dad?" I kept walking. He caught up near the elevator. "You do not have to make a spectacle. You are planning a public transfer." "I mean the emotional part." I pressed the elevator button. "Your mother's name is on the flagship. My name is forged on an inspection report. Which part feels emotional to you?" His face changed. "What report?" For 1 second, his confusion looked genuine. Then Vivian opened the office door behind him. "Ryan." He stepped away from me immediately. That answered a question I had not yet asked. My son knew about the financial scheme. But he might not know how the mechanical failure had been prepared. Weak people often enter crimes through small doors. One signature. One silence. One decision to believe the person who promises everything will be handled. By the time they notice the room has no windows, they are already locked inside. At 10:15, Naomi called. "Meet me at the maintenance yard," she said. "And bring someone you trust who knows the Harbor Queen." I brought Louise. The Harbor Queen sat in dry dock, her blue hull streaked with winter salt. She was North Star's oldest active ferry. Not beautiful. Not fast. But reliable. Louise and Naomi spent 40 minutes inspecting the propulsion controls while I reviewed the maintenance binder. 3 repair invoices claimed the steering backup, emergency generator, and bilge alarm had been replaced using federal safety grant money. The equipment still carried serial numbers from 11 years earlier. The replacements had never happened. The grant money had. Caleb called while I was reading the 3rd invoice. He had traced the payments. North Star paid a contractor called Seaward Technical Solutions. Seaward transferred most of the money to Bayline Advisory. Bayline's registered manager was Vivian's younger brother. And Bayline had recently purchased an option to acquire 2 of our terminals through a Halcyon subsidiary. The company was paying Vivian's family to pretend to repair boats. Then her family was helping Halcyon buy the property after those boats failed. Naomi emerged from the engine space holding a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a small electronic control module. "Someone installed this beside the propulsion monitor," she said. "What does it do?" "It can create false failure readings and block the normal warning sequence." Louise stared at her. So the engine could appear dead even if it was functioning? Or a real problem could develop without the bridge receiving the correct warning? I looked toward the Harbor Queen's dark passenger windows. Tomorrow, Vivian expected the boat to lose power in front of investors and cameras. But altered warning equipment meant she could not fully control what happened afterward. Her staged embarrassment could become a real emergency. "Can you remove it?" I asked. Naomi nodded. "Already did." "No." I stopped. "Put it back." Louise turned toward me. "Thomas, absolutely not. Put back a harmless replacement. Something that transmits the same signal but cannot interfere with the boat." Naomi understood first. "You want whoever installed it to believe the plan is intact." "I want Vivian standing aboard that ferry when she explains why she expected it to fail." Louise looked at me as though I had become someone he did not recognize. Perhaps I had. Then a voice came from the open maintenance yard door. "Grandpa?" Sophie stood outside holding her backpack. Beside her was Ryan. My son looked from Naomi to the open engine compartment. Then to the evidence bag. His face collapsed. "Dad," he whispered, "you need to get Sophie away from this boat." I stepped toward him. "Why?" Ryan looked over his shoulder, making sure no one else had followed. Then he said the words that turned our investigation into a countdown. "Because Vivian moved the accident to tonight." The words hung in the maintenance yard like a distress flare. Vivian had moved the accident to tonight. I looked at Ryan, then at Sophie. "Start from the beginning." Ryan rubbed both hands over his face. "After you left the office, Vivian found out the Harbor Queen had been inspected. She thinks someone from the old crew warned you. Halcyon told her waiting until tomorrow gave you too much time." "Who at Halcyon?" "Grant Sutter." I knew the name. Sutter was Halcyon's managing partner, a man who spoke at maritime conferences about preserving coastal communities while buying the land beneath them. "What did he order?" Ryan looked toward the open engine compartment. "A private rehearsal tonight. 8 o'clock. Vivian told the board the weather forecast forced us to move the farewell voyage forward. She invited the investors who are already in Portland and told the rest they can watch remotely." Naomi checked her watch. We had less than 5 hours. "How is the failure supposed to happen?" she asked. Ryan pointed toward the electronic module. "That device sends the signal. Then someone from Seaward shuts the fuel feed from the auxiliary control station. The boat drifts inside the channel for 6 or 7 minutes. A tug comes out, cameras record Dad taking responsibility, and Vivian announces Halcyon's rescue plan." Louise stared at him. You understand that shutting fuel inside an active channel can kill people? I told her. And then? Ryan swallowed. She said risk makes the footage believable. Sophie stepped behind me. That movement did more to condemn my son than anything he had admitted. His own daughter no longer felt safe standing beside him. I lowered my voice. How much did you sign? Ryan's eyes filled. More than I understood. That is not an amount. He flinched. 6 grant certifications. 2 equipment leases. The stabilization loan. I approved Seaward because Vivian said their prices were lower. You signed reports claiming equipment had been installed. She showed me invoices. You are the president. Invoices are not engines. I know that now. No. You knew it then. You simply preferred not to look. He had no answer. Weakness often disguises itself as confusion after the consequences arrive. Before that, it calls itself trust. Naomi closed the engine room hatch. We can make this vessel safe, but only if I control every access point before departure. Luis nodded. I will choose the crew. Ryan looked at me. You are still thinking about going? I am thinking about ending it. Dad, Sutter has people inside the company. If Vivian suspects anything, she will blame me. You signed the papers. She controlled the money. You controlled the company. His face tightened as though I had struck him. Perhaps the truth felt like violence because everyone around him had spent years cushioning it. Sophie spoke quietly. Dad, are you going to jail? Ryan turned toward her. No, sweetheart. He answered too quickly. I knelt beside her. I do not know what will happen to anyone. But you did the right thing by telling me. She looked at Ryan, not me. Mom said you would take all the blame. Ryan stopped breathing for a second. What? Sophie opened her backpack and removed a small flash drive shaped like a lighthouse. I copied her presentation. Vivian used the family laptop for work because she believed Sophie cared only about games and school projects. 2 nights earlier, Sophie had opened a video folder while searching for photographs of Ellen. Instead, she found a presentation titled After Action Communications. Slide 1 blamed Ryan for unauthorized use of federal grants. Slide 2 described Vivian as the executive who discovered the fraud. Slide 3 contained a draft statement expressing concern for the passengers, the employees, and her husband's unexplained misconduct. The final slide announced Vivian as North Star's interim president after Ryan's resignation and Thomas's transfer into assisted care. Ryan sat down on a tool chest. She was going to turn me in. No, I said. She was going to package you. He stared at the flash drive as if it contained his obituary. Sophie's voice trembled. There was also a letter about me. Ryan looked up. What letter? A school in Connecticut. Mom paid the deposit. A year-round boarding school. Enrollment beginning 3 days after the farewell voyage. Vivian had arranged to remove every person who could complicate her control. Me to Golden Pines. Ryan into a criminal investigation. Sophie behind locked gates 4 states away. For the first time, my son stopped defending his wife. Help me, he whispered. I looked at him for a long moment. I will help you tell the truth. That is not what I mean. I know. He lowered his head. That was the moment Ryan finally understood that being my son would not become an escape route. At 1:30, Elena contacted federal transportation investigators and the Financial Crimes Unit handling misuse of government grants. She did not promise arrests. Real investigations do not arrive on command simply because a family has reached the dramatic part of its argument. She provided the recording, the copied presentation, the payment trail, and Naomi's photographs of the control module. The investigators agreed to place observers aboard the Harbor Queen and secure the pier, but they needed the conspiracy to move beyond private conversation. They want Vivian or Sutter to act, Eleanor explained. Not merely discuss acting. They will, I said. Caleb found something else. Halcyon had purchased a large insurance policy connected to the Harbor Queen's replacement value. The beneficiary was a financing subsidiary, not Northstar. If the ferry suffered a total loss, Halcyon would receive enough money to cover its planned investment before buying our terminals at a reduced price. Vivian expected a controlled breakdown. Sutter would profit more from a destroyed vessel. I asked Naomi the question no one wanted to hear. Could he sink her? Not easily in the channel. But he could create a collision, a fire, or an evacuation that causes injuries. Luis looked toward the hull. Then we cancel. If we cancel, they move to another boat or destroy records. Thomas, those are passengers. Not tonight. We control the list. I instructed the office to tell Vivian that state officials had cancelled because of the schedule change. Most investors would watch through the livestream. The people physically aboard would be selected employees, board members who already knew enough to cooperate, undercover investigators, Vivian, Ryan, Sutter, and me. Sophie would remain ashore with Eleanor. She objected until I gave her Ellen's brass compass. Your grandmother carried this on Northstar's first voyage, I said. Tonight I need someone I trust to protect it. She closed both hands around it. Come back for it. I will. By 4 o'clock, Naomi had replaced the sabotage module with a harmless duplicate that transmitted every remote command to an evidence recorder. Luis changed the engine room access codes and assigned loyal crew members to every station. A Coast Guard patrol waited beyond the breakwater without visible lights. Federal investigators took positions as catering staff, technicians, and guests. Then Eleanor brought me the trust activation papers. The final page required only my signature. If you sign, she said, the terminals leave the Mercer family permanently once the fraud trigger is formally verified. I understand. Sophie will never inherit them. She will inherit something better. What? The chance not to become Vivian. I signed. The pen moved smoothly. There was no thunder. No dramatic wind against the windows. Just ink crossing paper and 50 years of family expectation coming to an end. Eleanor sealed the document inside a blue envelope. What do you want done with it? Give it to the investigators after the presentation begins. And Ryan? He finds out with everyone else. At 7:45, the Harbor Queen glowed against the dark pier. Vivian stood beneath the boarding canopy wearing a cream-colored suit and a smile sharp enough to cut rope. She kissed Ryan's cheek for the cameras. He did not react. When she saw me, she opened her arms as though the previous night had never happened. Thomas, tonight is your celebration. No, I said. Tonight is yours. She mistook the words for surrender. Sutter boarded behind her. He was 60, tall and silver-haired, with a navy overcoat and the relaxed posture of a man accustomed to owning the outcome before negotiations began. He shook my hand. Mr. Mercer, Halcyon respects what you built. Then you are different from everyone else trying to buy it. His smile remained fixed. We are trying to preserve it. Preservation usually leaves the original structure standing. He released my hand. Vivian moved between us. Let us save the speeches for the water. At 8:12, we left the pier. Rain tapped against the windows. Portland's lights faded behind us as the Harbor Queen entered the channel. Vivian began the livestream from the passenger salon. Behind her, the presentation screen displayed a photograph of Ellen and me beside our first ferry. For a moment, grief moves through me so suddenly that I forgot the trap, the investigators, and the blue envelope. Ellen was 25 in that photograph. She had one hand on the rail and the other on my shoulder. She looked as if the future could not frighten her. Perhaps it never had. Vivian invited me to the front. Thomas has chosen to place Northstar's future above personal pride, she told the cameras. Tonight, he will transfer his remaining authority to the next generation. Polite applause followed. Ryan stood near the wall, pale and silent. Sutter held the blue folder containing the false transition agreement. I took my place beside the screen. Before I sign, I want everyone to understand exactly what is being transferred." Vivian nodded. "Of course." I pressed the remote. The photograph disappeared. The forged inspection report filled the screen. My name sat at the bottom. Vivian's smile froze. I changed the slide. Federal grant invoices appeared beside photographs of equipment that had never been replaced. Then came the payment trail from Northstar to Seaward, from Seaward to Bayline, and from Bayline to the Halcyon Property subsidiary. No one applauded now. Sutter stepped toward the control table. A man dressed as a technician blocked him. The man opened his jacket just enough to reveal federal credentials. Vivian looked at Ryan. "You did this?" Ryan's voice shook, but he answered, "No. Sophie did." For the first time that night, Vivian lost control of her face. I played the recording. Her own voice filled the salon. The Harbor Queen loses propulsion inside the channel. Thomas takes responsibility. Halcyon announces the rescue package. Several board members turned toward her. She raised both hands. "This is manipulated. Thomas is confused and vindictive." I changed the slide again. Her after-action communications plan appeared behind me. Ryan's photograph was labeled Responsible Executive. Vivian's was labeled Corrective Leadership. My son read the words in front of everyone. Whatever hope remained inside him disappeared. "You were sending Sophie away," he said. Vivian did not answer him. She looked at Sutter. It was not the look of a partner asking for help. It was the look of an employee awaiting instructions. Sutter checked his watch. Then every alarm on the Harbor Queen began sounding at once. Red lights flashed above the doors. The screen went black. Luis's voice came through my earpiece. "False propulsion signal received. Engines remain normal." That was expected. Then the boat turned sharply to starboard. Glasses slid from tables. People grabbed the backs of chairs. Naomi's voice followed, urgent and breathless. "Thomas, the duplicate module is not controlling this." Through the rain-covered windows, I saw the channel markers moving to the wrong side of the ferry. Beyond them lay a field of black rocks. Luis shouted from the bridge. "The helm is not responding." Sutter remained perfectly calm. He looked at me across the flashing red light. Then he said, "Vivian planned a breakdown, Mr. Mercer." He buttoned his coat. "I planned a funeral." The Harbor Queen was less than 4 minutes from the rocks. I knew because I had crossed the channel in every kind of weather for 45 years. In clear daylight, the reef looked harmless. At night, beneath rain and black water, it waited like broken teeth. Sutter stood in the center of the salon while alarms flashed around him. Vivian stared at him. "You said the boat would drift." Sutter did not look at her. "I said Halcyon would solve Northstar's problem." "You were not supposed to hurt anyone." That concern arrived very late. 2 federal investigators moved toward him. Sutter reached inside his coat. The nearest investigator forced his arm down before he could remove whatever he was holding. They drove him against the wall and secured his wrists. But arresting him did not change our direction. The ferry continued turning toward the reef. Luis's voice came through my earpiece. "Main steering hydraulics are locked. Backup controls are giving the same command." Naomi answered from below deck. "There is a second device inside the steering compartment. It is hardwired. I cannot isolate it from here." I looked at Ryan. He was staring through the windows at the approaching channel marker. "Dad," he whispered, "what do we do?" For the first time in years, he was not asking me to rescue his reputation. He was asking how to save lives. "Go to the bridge," I said. "Do exactly what Luis tells you." Vivian grabbed his sleeve. "Do not leave me." Ryan looked at her hand. Then he removed it. "Sophie is ashore because she was afraid of us." He walked away. Vivian called his name, but he did not turn back. I followed him toward the bridge. Behind us, investigators ordered the guests to remain seated and fasten life jackets. The livestream was still running. Thousands of viewers had watched the evidence presentation. Now they were watching the room tilt as the Harbor Queen moved toward disaster. That mattered later. At that moment, only the water mattered. The bridge windows were covered in rain. Luis stood at the helm, fighting a wheel that no longer controlled anything. A crew member called out the distance to the reef. Naomi's voice came over the radio. The remote unit is driving the steering ram directly. Cutting power will freeze the rudders in their current position. Can you center them manually? Luis asked. Not before impact. The old Harbor Queen had one advantage no investor understood. She had been rebuilt 3 times, but I had refused to remove every mechanical connection from her earliest design. Beneath the modern controls was an emergency linkage that could disconnect the rudders from the hydraulic system. It was slow. It was ugly. It had never been used outside a drill. But it existed. Open the aft steering access, I told Luis. He stared at me. Thomas, that compartment is restricted while we are underway. So are the rocks. Ryan followed me down. The ferry leaned through another uncontrolled turn. A serving cart struck the wall somewhere above us. The emergency lights made the passageway pulse red. At the aft compartment, Naomi had already removed the access panel. The steering machinery shook beneath us. She pointed to the lock linkage. The release will not move under load. Ryan looked at the heavy mechanism. What takes the load off? Centering pressure from the bridge, Naomi said. But the controller keeps forcing it back. I called Luis. When I say now, reverse the port engine and push starboard ahead. That will spin us. That is the idea. The maneuver would not steer the rudders. It would use the engines against each other to rotate the ferry and briefly reduce the pressure on the linkage. Luis hesitated for less than a second. Then he said, "Ready." Naomi and I took hold of the release bar. Ryan stepped beside us. I almost told him to leave. Then I remembered every time I had protected him from the weight of his own decisions. "Stay," I said. The channel marker passed the window. Beyond it, white water broke over the reef. I spoke into the radio. Now. The engines changed pitch. The Harbor Queen shuddered. The floor moved sideways beneath us. Pressure came off the linkage for one brief moment. Naomi pulled. I pulled. Ryan threw his full weight against the bar. It moved. The hydraulic connection released with a heavy metallic crack. The steering mechanism stopped fighting us. "Linkage free," Naomi shouted. Luis shifted power again. The ferry's turn slowed. For several seconds, the boat continued toward the rocks. Then it began moving left. The reef passed so close to the starboard side that spray struck the upper windows. No one cheered. Not yet. Luis guided us back toward the center of the channel using engine power alone. The Coast Guard patrol appeared through the rain. Only when its searchlight reached us did the first applause begin upstairs. Ryan sat on the compartment floor. His hands were shaking. He looked at me. "I nearly helped them sink this boat." "You helped save it." "That does not erase what I signed." "No." He waited for me to soften the answer. I did not. "No," I repeated. "It does not." He nodded. For once, he accepted a truth without asking someone else to carry it. When we returned to the salon, Vivian was sitting beneath the dead presentation screen with an investigator beside her. Sutter stood in restraints near the rear door. His calm expression was gone. The duplicate sabotage module had recorded every command sent from his phone. Investigators had also recovered a remote steering application and messages ordering a Seaward employee to make the ferry unrecoverable. Vivian saw me and rushed to speak. "Thomas, I did not know. I wanted a breakdown, not this." The room became silent. She realized too late that the live stream microphone was still active. One of the investigators looked at her. "You wanted a breakdown?" Vivian's mouth opened. No answer came. Sutter laughed. "She arranged the first plan. I improved the return." Vivian turned on him. "You used me. You presented yourself as useful." It was the cruelest thing anyone could have said to her because it was exactly how she had treated everyone else. She pointed toward Ryan. He approved the contracts. He signed the certifications. Asked him. Everyone looked at my son. This was his final doorway. He could claim ignorance. He could blame his wife. He could say he had trusted the wrong person and understood too little. All of those statements contained pieces of truth. None contained enough. Ryan walked to the front of the salon. He looked at the camera. My wife created false vendors and planned the staged failure. Vivian shouted, "Ryan, stop." He continued. Grant Sutter changed that plan without telling us. But I signed the grant certifications. I approved payments without confirming the work. I knew the pension proposal was improper, and I stayed silent because I thought the investment would save my position. His voice broke. I also knew my father was being pressured to surrender the terminals. I told myself it was modernization. It was theft, and I helped make it possible. Vivian stared at him as though betrayal belonged only to her. An investigator stepped forward. "Mr. Mercer, you should stop speaking until counsel is present." Ryan nodded. Then he turned to me. "Did I finally tell enough of the truth?" "It is a beginning." Agents escorted Sutter, Vivian, and Ryan to separate areas of the vessel. My son did not ask me to interfere. The Harbor Queen reached the pier at 10:37. Eleanor and Sophie stood beyond the security line. Sophie ran toward me the moment officers allowed her through. She held Ellen's brass compass in one hand. "You came back." "I promised." Then she saw Ryan being escorted down the gangway. He was not handcuffed, but an investigator walked on either side of him. Sophie moved closer to me. Ryan stopped several feet away. "I am sorry," he said. Sophie's answer was quieter. "Which part?" He had no reply. Eleanor handed the blue envelope to the lead investigator. The employee trust provision was formally activated the following morning. The 3 terminals passed out of Mercer family control. Vivian's attorneys tried to challenge the transfer. They failed. Ellen's clause was clear, the evidence was stronger, and the fraud trigger had been verified by more witnesses than she had ever imagined. The waterfront now belonged to the people whose work had made it valuable. 5 employees were elected as trustees. Luis became one of them. A ticket supervisor named Maribel Cruz became another. For the first time in 50 years, no Mercer sat at the head of the table. That included me. Some people called it a tragedy. I called it maintenance. When a family can no longer protect a structure, you transfer responsibility to those who will. The investigation lasted 16 months. Sutter pleaded guilty after the remote commands, insurance documents, and messages connected him to the attempted destruction of the Harbor Queen. Several Seaward executives were charged with grant fraud and falsifying maritime safety records. Vivian insisted she had been manipulated. The recordings, shell companies, school deposit, assisted living arrangement, and presentation blaming Ryan made that argument difficult to sustain. She was convicted on financial and conspiracy charges. Her sentence was measured in years, not in the apologies she never offered. Ryan cooperated from the first night. That reduced the consequences, but it did not remove them. He pleaded guilty to signing false federal certifications and participating in the misuse of company funds. He served time, lost his maritime licenses, and was permanently barred from managing the employee trust. I did not pay his legal bills. I did not ask anyone to protect him from the result. I visited him once before sentencing. We sat across from each other in a plain room with a table bolted to the floor. He looked smaller without an office behind him. I thought if I admitted everything, you might forgive me. I do forgive you. He stared at me. Then why are you letting this happen? Because forgiveness is not the same as pretending you are innocent. His eyes filled. What happens to us? That depends on what you build when no one gives you the materials. It was the kind of answer I had once hated hearing from my own father. Now I understood it. North Star survived. The employee trust sold one unused development parcel, paid down the emergency debt, restored the pension money, and canceled every Halcyon agreement. Naomi supervised a full fleet inspection. Real repairs replaced the imaginary ones. Luis became operations director. I accepted an unpaid advisory position with one condition: no office. I worked from the docks. 6 months later, I stood beside Sophie at the maintenance yard while she tested the motor inside her model lighthouse. The light rotated once, stopped, then began again. She frowned. "The wire is loose." "Then fix the connection." She opened the small wooden base and adjusted it herself. The light began circling steadily. Sophie smiled. "Dad wrote me. How do you feel about that?" "I do not know yet." "That is allowed." "Do I have to forgive him?" "No." "Did you?" "Yes." "Why?" "I watched the Harbor Queen approach the pier under a clear afternoon sky. Because I did not want his worst decision controlling the rest of my life." She thought about that. Then she placed the lighthouse on the edge of the dock. After Ryan completed his sentence, he did not return to North Star. He found work repairing commercial fishing equipment in a town north of Portland. The pay was modest. The work was real. He called Sophie every Sunday. Sometimes she answered. Sometimes she did not. He learned to be grateful for either. 1 year after the farewell voyage, North Star held another celebration aboard the L&M. There were no investors from Halcyon. No speeches about scale. The passenger list included employees, retirees, island families, and the crews who had kept the company moving through the investigation. Luis asked me to speak. I stood beneath the same screen where Vivian had displayed her lies. I looked at the deckhands near the doors. At the mechanics with grease beneath their fingernails. At Sophie holding Ellen's compass. "I was called a dockhand in this room," I said. A few people lowered their eyes. I was meant to hear it as an insult. I looked through the windows at the terminals now protected by the workers. But a dockhand understands something executives often forget. A ship does not belong to the person giving the speech. It belongs, for that moment, to everyone trusting it to carry them home. The room remained silent. Not uncomfortable. Attentive. I raised Ellen's compass. "My family nearly lost North Star because we confused inheritance with worthiness. We believed the name gave us the right to control what thousands of people had built. It did not. The company survived only when the truth mattered more than the family name." Sophie reached for my hand after I stepped away from the microphone. Outside, the harbor lights moved across the dark water. Vivian believed accepting my place meant becoming small enough for her to control. She never understood that I had known my place all along. My place was not at the head of a table. It was not inside the largest office. It was not printed beneath the word founder. My place was wherever the structure was failing and someone had to decide whether to protect the name or save the people inside it. That night, I chose the people. And for the first time in years, North Star carried all of us home.